Ray Dalton knew something was off the moment he saw the wallet again, sitting on the wooden table in the club garage like it had been waiting for him, and that feeling in his chest was the same slow weight he used to get years ago before things went bad. He didn't touch it right away because he already knew whose it was and how it had come back, and that was the part that didn't sit right with him. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The kid who returned, it was still outside near the open garage door, thin shoulders under a faded gray hoodie, standing like he wasn't sure if he should stay or leave, and the other club men were watching without speaking, not because they were scared, but because they were waiting to see what Ray would do first. Ray finally picked up the wallet and opened it slow, the same way he checked things when he suspected trouble, and every dollar was there, folded the same way he kept it, even the old receipt from a gas station 3 towns over, which meant the kid hadn't taken a thing, not even a coin, and that small detail bothered Ray more than if the cash had been gone. Most people would have taken something, especially a kid who looked like he hadn't eaten well in weeks, but this one didn't, and honest people showing up out of nowhere usually meant a problem was walking in behind them. One of the members, Lucas, leaned against the tool chest and said quiet. He said he found it near the road past Miller's Bridge, and Ray nodded once because that was where he had stopped yesterday when he got a call that distracted him. And that was the small choice he now wished he could take back, stepping off his bike for just a minute, pulling the wallet out, not checking his pocket when he rode off again. He remembered that call too well, the voice on the other end calm and slow, asking questions that sounded simple but weren't, and Ray had known even then that answering had been a mistake, just like years ago when he ignored his gut and a man ended up hurt because of it, something the club never talked about but never forgot either. The kid shifted his weight outside and finally said, "Sir, I just wanted to bring it back." And his voice wasn't shaking, just tired, like he was used to people not believing him. And Ray looked at him long enough to see he wasn't lying or acting brave. He was just done with being cold and hungry and wanted to finish what he came to do. Another member, Jess, crossed her arms and asked the kid where exactly he found it. And he pointed down the road again and explained it plain, no extra words, and everything he said lined up too clean, which was its own kind of warning because life was rarely that neat. Ray closed the wallet and thanked him, then gave him a few bills for the trouble, and the kid hesitated before taking them, like he didn't want it to look like that had been his plan all along, and that hesitation told Ray more than any speech could. The garage stayed quiet after that, the kind of quiet where everyone is thinking the same thing, but no one wants to say it first, because if the wallet had really been lying out there untouched, it meant nobody else had passed that road since yesterday. And that didn't make sense, not with how many people used that stretch, which left only one idea none of them liked. Lucas finally muttered, "You think someone wanted it found?" And Ray didn't answer right away because he was already sure that was exactly what had happened. He looked back at the kid, who was now staring at the ground like he wished he could disappear, and Ray felt that old guilt press heavier on his chest, the feeling that came when a small decision started rolling downhill into something you couldn't stop. He slipped the wallet into his jacket and told the kid he could go, and the boy nodded and walked off slow. Not relieved, just quiet, like he understood more than he should. Ray watched him until he reached the corner. Then he said softly to the room, "This ain't luck." And nobody argued because they all felt it too, that something had been set in motion the moment he lost that wallet. And now that it had come back clean and complete, it meant whoever had picked it up first didn't want money. They wanted his attention, and Ray knew problems like that didn't fade with time. They waited, and this one was not going to go away on its own. Ray didn't sit down after saying it wasn't luck. He just stayed standing near the table with his hands resting on the wood, eyes on the same scratch mark he'd seen 100 times before, because when a man has led people long enough, he learns that trouble doesn't always show up loud. Sometimes it walks in quiet, and polite like that kid did. And the worst part was nobody in the garage looked surprised, which meant they all felt the same slow pressure building in the room. Lucas was the first to speak again. Not because he was bold, but because he handled problems like he handled engines, by taking them apart piece by piece. And he said maybe they should drive out to that road and check the area, see if someone had been watching, maybe even ask around the gas station nearby. And his idea sounded reasonable, but Ray shook his head a little because going out there now would only show whoever set this up that they were nervous. Jess suggested they forget it and treat it like nothing. Put the wallet back in Ray's pocket and go on like usual, which was her way of protecting the club, since she always believed attention was worse than danger. But even she didn't sound convinced while saying it, and that was rare for her. On the far side of the garage, Dean, who kept records and handled calls, spoke without looking up from his notebook and said a man had phoned earlier asking about Ray. Asking in a calm voice like he was checking business hours, and that made the air feel heavier because Dean didn't mention things unless they mattered. Ray asked what the caller wanted, and Dean said he didn't say, just that he'd call again, and nobody liked that because patient men were harder to deal with than angry ones. The group fell quiet again, each of them running through ideas in their own head, but no plan felt clean. Every option seemed to trade one problem for another, and Ray could see it on their faces, the same look people get when they know a storm is coming but don't know from which direction. He thought about the kid then, the way he stood there without fear or hurry, and that detail bothered him most because kids who live on the street learn to read danger fast, yet that one didn't act scared of bikers or strangers or anything, which meant someone had either sent him or warned him ahead of time that he'd be safe. Jess finally said what the others were thinking, that maybe they should find the kid again and ask more questions, not rough him up, just talk, and Ray knew she meant it straight. But even that felt wrong because dragging the boy back would only prove they were rattled. And once you show that, people who like control start pulling harder. Dean cleared his throat and said there was another choice, though it would cost them, and everyone looked at him because Dean never spoke unless he'd already thought through the price. He said they could shut things down for a while, cancel runs, keep bikes parked, stop meetings, act like the club didn't exist for a few days, and that way whoever was watching wouldn't see movement worth studying. Lucas didn't like that at all and said lying low made them look weak, but Dean answered calm, that looking weak and being weak were different things, and Ray listened without interrupting because he wanted to hear every angle before deciding. The truth was the club depended on routine. People expected deliveries, check-ins, small favors, and stopping all that even for a short time meant losing trust they'd spent years building, and trust was harder to earn back than money. Ray rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table and remembered that old mistake again, the one that still sat in his chest like a stone, and he knew rushing now could turn this small problem into something that stuck with them the same way. Jess said quietly that she'd cancel her side jobs if that's what it took, and Lucas sighed and nodded after a moment, which told Ray more than any promise because Lucas hated pausing work, and Dean closed his notebook like the choice was already made. Ray looked at each of them, seeing not soldiers or followers, but tired people who had tied their lives to the same place. And he understood that whatever he said next would cost them time, money, and maybe reputation, but sometimes the price you pay early is the only thing that keeps the price later from getting worse. So he told them they'd go quiet for 3 days, no rides, no deals, no visitors, nothing that gave anyone a reason to watch their door, and nobody argued after that, which meant they trusted him even if they didn't like it. Outside, the road stayed empty, the same way it had looked when the kid walked away, and Ray slipped his hands into his jacket pockets, feeling the weight of the wallet again, like it was heavier than leather and paper, and he knew they had just agreed to something that would hurt them in ways that wouldn't show right away, but it was the only choice that didn't feel like stepping straight into a trap. The first day of staying quiet passed slower than anyone expected, and that alone made the air inside the garage feel thick, because men who are used to moving start thinking too much when they have nothing to do, and thinking can be worse than danger when it keeps circling the same questions. Ray spent most of the morning sitting near the open door, watching the road like he was waiting for weather to change, while Lucas cleaned tools that were already clean and just sorted parts that didn't need sorting, and nobody said much because silence felt safer than guessing out loud. By afternoon, the stillness started to feel unnatural, like the world had stepped around them on purpose. And that was when the kid came back. He didn't walk up fast or call out. He just appeared at the edge of the lot again, hands in his hoodie pockets, shoulders tight against the wind, and Ray noticed right away that the boy looked more tired than before, not scared, just worn down like he hadn't slept. Jess saw him next and gave Ray a look that asked a question without words, and Ray nodded once. So she stepped aside and let the kid come closer. The boy stopped a few feet from the doorway and said, "I think I'm messed up," in a voice that stayed low and steady. And that sentence alone made something shift in Ray's chest, because people who admit mistakes without being pushed are usually telling the truth. Ray told him to explain, nothing harsh in his tone, just patient, and the kid glanced back at the road before speaking like he wanted to make sure no one else was near. He said when he found the wallet yesterday, it hadn't been lying alone like he first claimed. There had been a car parked farther down, engine off, someone sitting inside watching him, and he'd felt it even without looking straight at them. Lucas straightened a little at that, but didn't interrupt, and the boy kept going, saying the person never got out, never spoke, just waited, and when the kid picked up the wallet, the car's headlights flashed once, quick like a signal, and that was when he got nervous and left fast. Ray asked why he hadn't said that before, and the kid shrugged in a small, tired way and said he didn't want trouble. He just wanted to return the wallet and be done. But after walking away, he kept thinking about the car and how it didn't feel random. And the more he thought, the more it felt like he'd been used without knowing it. No one spoke for a few seconds after that, and the quiet between them said more than arguing would have, because now the shape of the problem looked different, clearer, and heavier at the same time. Dean finally asked what the car looked like, and the kid described it plain, dark color, older model, nothing special, which somehow made it worse because plain things are harder to trace. Ray felt that old guilt again, stronger now, because losing the wallet hadn't just been careless. It had given someone a way to study them without stepping close, and that meant the mistake had already grown roots before he even noticed it. Jess leaned against the doorframe and asked the kid why he came back to tell them. And he answered honest that he didn't like the feeling of being part of something he didn't understand, and he figured they should know since it was their wallet and their problem, not his. That answer made Lucas look down at the floor, not ashamed exactly, just thoughtful, because loyalty offered without reason has a weight to it. Ray studied the boy's face, searching for signs of a lie or a hidden angle. But all he saw was someone who'd been carrying a thought too long and wanted to put it down. The truth settled over the group slowly, like dust after something falls, and it changed how they saw the last 2 days, turning what had seemed like a strange accident into something planned and patient. Dean closed his eyes for a second and said quietly that a man who watches instead of acting usually already knows what he wants, and nobody disagreed, because that kind of man doesn't rush. Ray knew then who it probably was, not by name, but by type, someone calm, someone who liked pressure more than noise, the same kind of person who had called before, and realizing that didn't bring relief. It only made the path ahead feel narrower. The kid shifted his feet like he thought he'd said enough and should leave, but Ray stopped him with a small raise of his hand and thanked him for coming back. And he meant it, because truth, even late, is still worth something. The boy nodded once and stepped away again, quieter than before, and they watched him go until he turned the corner just like yesterday. No one spoke for a long moment after that. And in that silence, Ray understood that staying quiet for 3 days wouldn't end this. It would only delay it because whoever was behind the car had already started the conversation, whether they answered or not. Lucas finally asked what they should do now, and Ray took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the choice before he even said it, because he knew the safest answer was also the one he trusted least. He said they would return the call if it came again and agreed to meet, even though every instinct told him that stepping toward a patient enemy was a mistake he would regret. But he also knew ignoring a man like that only made him come closer. And sometimes the wrong decision is the only one that keeps things from getting worse right away. The call came the next morning while the garage was still half dark and cold, and nobody rushed to answer it, because they all knew rushing would only show nerves. So Dean let it ring twice more before picking up and putting on speaker, and the voice that came through was calm in a way that made it feel like the man on the other end was sitting comfortably somewhere, maybe even smiling a little, not because anything was funny, but because he knew he had time. He didn't say his name, and he didn't ask who was listening. He just said he appreciated that they had chosen to stay quiet the last couple of days, which told them right away he had been watching just like the kid described. And Ray felt that slow weight settle deeper in his chest because it meant every choice they made had already been noticed. The man said he only wanted a short meeting, nothing dramatic, just to talk to clear up something that belonged to him. And his tone never changed, never pushed, like he was offering a polite favor instead of making a demand. Lucas muttered under his breath that they shouldn't go, but he didn't say it loud because even he knew the caller might be close enough to hear more than the phone carried. Ray asked where, and the man gave an address outside town near an old storage yard that hadn't been used in years, then added that only Ray should come because too many people made simple talks complicated. After that, he hung up without saying goodbye, and the quiet he left behind felt heavier than noise. Jess looked at Ray with that steady expression she used when she already knew his decision but didn't like it, and Dean closed his notebook slowly like he was marking the moment in his head. Ray said he'd go alone like asked, and Lucas started to object but stopped halfway because they all understood that refusing would only turn pressure into something worse, and sometimes showing up was the only way to keep things from spilling over. Nobody tried to give a speech or act brave. They just moved around getting ready in small practical ways. Just checking Ray's bike without being told, Lucas handing him his gloves, Dean writing the address again on a scrap of paper even though Ray had memorized it, and those small actions showed their loyalty more clearly than words could. The ride out there was quiet and gray, the road mostly empty, and Ray kept his speed steady because arriving too fast can look like fear and arriving too slow can look like doubt, and he didn't want to show either. The storage yard sat behind a rusted fence with a gate hanging half open, and there was only one car inside, dark and plain just like the kid had described, parked near the center like it had been waiting a while. Ray rolled in and cut the engine, and the silence after the motor stopped made every small sound stand out. The tick of hot metal, the wind brushing loose gravel, and then the car door opened and a man stepped out wearing a simple coat. Nothing fancy, nothing rough, just a person who looked like he belonged anywhere. He greeted Ray like they were meeting for coffee, thanked him for coming, and said he respected people who kept their word, and his eyes stayed calm the whole time. Not hard, not angry, just sure. He explained that something had gone missing from him recently, something small but important, and he believed Ray's club had it without realizing, and he wanted it returned so things could stay peaceful. Ray listened without interrupting because he knew this kind of man measured reactions more than replies, and he asked what exactly was missing. The man said it was a flash drive, nothing valuable to most people, but meaningful to him, and he believed it had slipped into Ray's wallet by mistake during a stop at Miller's Bridge, which meant when Ray lost the wallet, he also lost something that didn't belong to him. Hearing that made Ray's stomach tighten because it fit too cleanly with everything that had happened, and he realized the small choice of stepping off his bike that day had tangled them in something they hadn't even seen. Ray told him the wallet hadn't contained any drive when it was returned, and the man nodded like he expected that answer, then said calm that meant someone else must have taken it after the wallet fell and before the boy found it. And that was unfortunate because now the problem had spread. He didn't threaten, didn't raise his voice. He just said that unless the drive was found soon, he would have to assume the club was keeping it from him, and that assumption would force him to act in ways he preferred to avoid. Ray knew that tone, not loud, not sharp, just steady, and he understood this was the consequence walking up to meet him face to face. He said he'd help look, and the man thanked him again like they were discussing a lost package, then added one more thing before getting back in his car, that misunderstandings can cost people things they don't expect, and it's always better when they're cleared up early. Then he drove off slow, leaving Ray alone in the yard with the wind and the ticking of cooling metal, and Ray stood there a long minute because he felt it in his bones that something had already been taken from them the moment that wallet hit the road, something they couldn't see yet but wouldn't get back once it was gone. Ray rode back slower than he had ridden out, not because he was scared but because he was thinking, and when a man like him thinks too fast, he knows he might miss something small that matters. So he let the road stretch, and the engine hummed steady while he went over every word the calm man had said, every pause, every look, trying to see if there had been a hidden meaning tucked inside the plain talk. But the more he replayed it, the clearer it became that there had been no tricks at all, just pressure laid down neat and patient, the kind that keeps working long after the person who said it walks away. When he reached the garage, the others didn't crowd him or fire questions. They just watched his face, and that told him they already understood the meeting hadn't solved anything. He told them straight what the man wanted about the flash drive, about the bridge, about the assumption that would be made if it wasn't found, and nobody interrupted because there wasn't anything to argue with. It all made a hard kind of sense. Lucas leaned back against the wall and stared at the floor like he was trying to picture the row by the bridge in his head, just folded her arms tight, but didn't speak, and Dean just nodded once, slow, as if confirming a thought he'd already had. The truth settled over them that the drive was probably gone for good, picked up by someone who didn't even know what it was and might have tossed it aside or sold it cheap, which meant the club was now tied to a problem they couldn't fix no matter how hard they tried. And that was the worst kind of problem because effort didn't change it. Ray said they'd still look, check the roadside, ask quiet questions, not because he believed they'd find it, but because doing nothing would look like guilt, and they all agreed without liking it. The next 2 days passed with slow searches and short trips, each of them taking turns riding out alone or in pairs, scanning gravel edges, ditches, and gas station lots, asking careful questions that didn't sound like questions, but nothing turned up except dust and old trash, and with every empty mile the weight on their shoulders grew a little heavier. On the third evening, Dean came back last, shut the garage door behind him, and said softly that a man had visited while the others were out, left a message polite as ever. That time was running short and patience didn't last forever, and that was all he'd said before walking away. No threat, no anger, just that. And somehow that made it worse because it meant the decision had already been made somewhere else. Nobody spoke for a long while after hearing it, and the silence felt different now, not tense like before, but settled, like when people understand something unpleasant at the same time. Jess finally said she was going to take a break from the club for a while, not storming out, not upset, just tired, and she explained that pressure like this spreads to everyone connected, and she had family she didn't want pulled into something they didn't choose. Lucas didn't try to stop her. He just nodded and told her to stay safe, and that simple exchange showed more loyalty than any promise to stay would have. She packed her things slow, gave Ray a look that held respect, but also worry, then walked out the same way the kid had days ago, quiet and steady, and the sound of the door closing behind her felt final in a way none of them said aloud. Ray watched that door a long time, feeling the loss settle in his chest, because people could leave and still be alive, but that didn't mean you got them back, and he knew that was the thing the wallet had cost them. Not money, not trouble, but a piece of the life they'd built together. Later that night, the phone rang again, and nobody hurried to answer. And when Dean picked up the same calm voice, simply said he understood the drive hadn't been found and that he hoped Ray would remember this lesson about small mistakes. Then he wished them a good evening and ended the call. That was it. No demands, no instructions, just a man closing a book he'd already finished reading. And somehow that quiet ending made it clear the matter wasn't really over. It had only moved somewhere they couldn't see. The garage stayed open a while longer, the night air cool and still, and Ray stood there with his hands in his pockets, thinking about how one careless moment by a roadside had started all of this, how a lost wallet, an honest kid, and a patient stranger had slowly shifted the shape of his world without raising their voices once. Some problems arrive loud and leave fast, but the ones that come soft and polite tend to stay. And as Ray finally turned off the lights, he understood that the real cost of a mistake isn't paid all at once. It's paid quietly over time. And by the time you notice, something you can't replace is already gone, which is why the smallest wrong choice is often the one that follows you the longest.